At first, I didn't notice anything off. It was a scorching mid-July day, the kind of day where kids collapse in laughter beneath shady trees or chase each other with water bottles. Just another summer shift for me at Green Valley Amusement Park, home of rickety coasters, swirling teacups, and overpriced cotton candy. I was on my usual morning rounds, stepping through the gate of the employee entrance at 7 a.m. sharp, the laughter from yesterday still lingering in my mind. Sometimes I like to imagine that the park was haunted by happy ghosts, memories of families whose voices never quite left. Nostalgic illusions, sure, but comforting. I'm Colin, 23 years old, and I operate the Tilt-A-Whirl ride near the far corner of the park. It's the perfect gig for someone like me who grew up dazzled by carnival rides. Before my family fell apart, before Mom left, before my dad sank into debts and regrets, I used to come to places like this with them. Me and my little sister named Angie shared cotton candy, squealed on roller coasters, lived those fleeting moments so fully that for a while, I believed all families were as happy as ours seemed. It's probably why, despite everything, I love this place. It's as if I'm trying to cling to what once was. The day seemed normal enough. I did my routine inspection of the Tilt-A-Whirl seats, checking the latches, testing the harnesses, fiddling with the controls until I was sure everything was in good shape. We're required to be thorough. One bolt out of place, and we could have a lawsuit on our hands. The morning started calm, the park mostly empty except for staff milling around. Some were restocking vendor carts. Others tested the roller coasters. A few put finishing touches on the new ride named Mindspin, which boasted the highest G-forces in our entire region. We'd all been hearing about that ride for a while. Big news, big lines expected, even bigger adrenaline rush. But it was while grabbing a coffee at a staff kiosk that I first overheard two ride technicians talking about that new brain chip. I'd been seeing commercials for it on my phone for weeks, something about an implant that was supposed to boost mental health, intelligence, concentration, even reduce anxiety. Rumor had it that half the new engineering interns on site were sporting the device. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. There was an edge of curiosity in me. Who wouldn't want to be more mentally sharp? But there was also a healthy dose of skepticism. I'd never been too keen on stuff that modifies your brain, especially not since I overheard Dad rant about conspiracy theories when he was on one of his usual benders. Anyway, I sipped my coffee and watched the sun climb. Park guests would flood the gates in less than an hour, so I hurried back to my station. The Tilt-A-Whirl has always been my favorite ride to operate. It's got that cheerful carnival aesthetic. Bright red cups spinning around a central axis, carnival music playing softly from overhead speakers. Kids never come off without grins plastered on their faces. The best part is seeing them rush back in line for another go. A few employees stopped by for a quick hello. My manager, a wiry man named Calvin, gave me a quick nod on his way to check on the Mindspin. Calvin's a guy in his 40s with keen eyes that always seem to be appraising you. Nice enough, usually, but there's something about him that felt guarded. Still, I guess that's typical for a manager who's been around the block. I was halfway through my third test spin of the Tilt-A-Whirl when the music over the loudspeakers abruptly cut out. A shrill alarm replaced it, piercing, urgent, unlike anything I'd heard at the park before. Emergency drills were standard, sure, but this was different. The alarm's tone was quickly followed by an automated voice that overshadowed the entire park. Emergency alert. Please remain calm and proceed to the nearest safe location. Park lockdown is in effect. No further instructions. No explanation. Just that repeated monotone, lockdown in effect. Lockdown in effect. Guests who just arrived began clumping near the entrances, confusion evident in their anxious faces. A father clutched his two little kids, scanning the environment like a hawk. A group of teenagers with their phones in hand tried to see if this was some publicity stunt. Employees exchanged worried looks. Then, we got the second message. A biological contamination incident has been detected. For your safety, do not leave the premises. This park is now under official quarantine orders. When the words finally sank in, hysteria erupted in pockets. People tried dashing for the exits, only to find the gates barricaded, locked electronically. Our park's main gates are massive rotating arms that can be sealed if necessary, and apparently, that's precisely what had happened. I abandoned my tilt-a-whirl console to see if I could figure out what the hell was going on. Across the walkway, I saw Donna, one of the ride operators for the bumper cars, running toward me. "Colin, did they just say contamination?" "Are we stuck?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded grimly. "That's what it sounds like." I gestured around. "We should get to the staff break room, see if we can find anyone who knows more. Maybe Calvin." Donna rubbed her arms anxiously. "What if it's a terror attack or some weird sickness?" I didn't have an answer. As we walked, a text message from the city's emergency system popped up in bits of glitchy data. "Outbreak, brain chip. Do not high risk." Then it cut out entirely. That's the moment I realized something bigger than just our park was going on. Maybe the entire network was jammed or restricted. I found Calvin near the main control station, out front of the Mindspin. He was shouting into a walkie-talkie, eyes wide with alarm. A crowd of staff had gathered around him, clamoring for information. When he saw me, he motioned me closer. "Colin, we've got a situation. They're telling us no one leaves the park until further notice." "Who is they?" I asked, but he shook his head, scanning the crowd. "Whoever's on the official line. Something about a biological hazard. The main office is telling me there's an outbreak connected to the new brain chip. We can't open the gates. Electricity for the locks has been hijacked by external orders. So we're completely sealed in." I stared at him. "Calvin, are you telling me everyone with that new brain implant could be, infected?" He ran a hand over his buzz-cut hair. "I'm not entirely sure. I only know the instructions came with an official Homeland Security code. This is serious." He was cut off as a sudden wave of screams erupted from across the plaza. Donna gasped, and everyone whirled. A teenage boy in a bright red t-shirt was staggering, eyes rolled back. Two guys, maybe his friends, tried to hold him, but he shook free and lunged forward, snarling like some wild animal. Then, as if spurred on by an invisible command, the boy bit into the arm of the older friend who was restraining him. The friend's scream sliced through the air. Blood spattered across the pavement. A woman who looked like a parent rushed in to help, but the teen pivoted, lunging for her next. Calvin grabbed my arm. "That's not normal rabies or some nonsense. Something's messing with their brains." He paused, swallowing. "I heard rumors about that brain chip causing anomalies under certain conditions. The engineering staff, they'd mentioned tests, something about the pilot who flew under intense G-forces. Do you remember the story?" I hadn't recalled it until that moment, but yes, about 6 months ago there was a hush-hush rumor about an airline pilot who'd had the chip. After an emergency maneuver, he allegedly lost it mid-flight, attacking the co-pilot, crashing the plane. But the official statement had chalked it up to mechanical failure. Still, some employees whispered that the company behind the chip paid hush money to keep the story hidden. Now it made sense. High G-forces might be warping the function of that brain chip. And in an amusement park full of roller coasters and spinning rides. My stomach dropped as I realized it. I saw the teen again, his mouth coated with blood, eyes distant, unseeing, the friend he'd bitten lying limp on the ground. A group of security guards rushed forward, pepper spray at the ready. They pinned him, or tried to, but it was like the kid had superhuman strength. He wriggled free, howling. More screams erupted across the park. Right then, a piercing voice tore into the air. "They're turning into monsters." Within minutes, all illusions of safety were gone. A stampede of park-goers and staff attempted to flee the immediate area, only to be blocked by locked gates or slammed in turnstiles that refused to budge. I tried to regroup with Donna and Calvin, but they'd been swallowed by the panicked mass. Then, I saw a flash of Donna's red staff polo near the hamburger stand. She was huddled behind a trash can, face ashen. 3 figures in the distance advanced on us. I grabbed Donna's arm. "We have to move. They're definitely infected or something. We can't stay out in the open." She pressed her hands to her ears, trembling. I saw them, 2 of them from the Mindspin line. They collapsed right after the ride ended. Then they got up like that kid. They bit a guard, Colin, bit him, and then started going after everyone else. I ran. "We'll figure something out," I promised, even though I had no plan. My legs felt like jelly, but letting fear paralyze us would be a death sentence. "Come on." I guided her around a toppled bench, stepping over spilled popcorn and soda cups. The place looked ransacked, as if we'd closed after the busiest day of the season, except it was barely 7 a.m. I scanned for a safe spot to regroup. The gift shop near the giant carousel had a metal security gate that could be pulled down. Maybe that would hold. We half-dashed, half-crawled past concession stands and scattered belongings, abandoned strollers, single shoes, half-eaten donuts. Over by the carousel, we found 6 people crouched behind the ride's wooden horses, the old carnival music still blaring from hidden speakers. A memory flitted through my mind. Angie and me riding a carousel years ago, giggling as the horses bobbed up and down. Now the same motion felt evil with the screams around it. "Quick, inside the gift shop," I yelled to Donna. "We can barricade ourselves for now." We rushed up to the entrance, hammered on the glass. 2 employees in there, a teenage cashier and a middle-aged woman in a staff uniform, hurried to let us in. The second we were in, we dragged down the security gate with a rattling clang, then locked it tight. Through the glass panels, the chaos continued. I glanced at the 2 employees, wide-eyed behind the counter. "Are you 2 okay?" I asked. They nodded shakily. The teenage cashier, Freddie, I think, could barely speak. "What's happening?" "No idea," I replied. "Something to do with that new brain chip, from what I can tell. People are turning violent after certain rides. Or maybe some kind of exposure. I don't know. We're quarantined in the park. No exit." Donna was doubled over, panting. "They can't just lock us in with them, can they? With these infected people." She didn't say zombies, but I heard the unspoken word. I mean, how else do you describe people biting and moving with that dead-eyed stare? I turned to the middle-aged staffer. Her name tag read Emma. "We can't just hide here forever, Emma. They might break in eventually, or we'll starve, or who knows." Her expression was grim. "We have a small storeroom in the back. Some emergency rations, water bottles. But you're right, this can't be permanent." With trembling fingers, I tried the park's employee radio clipped at my waist. Static. Then I twisted the dial to a different channel, praying for any sign of life. At first, only crackling. Finally, a voice broke through. "Pull back to the main offices if you can. Multiple casualties, sub-level safe spots." Then it cut out, but I'd heard enough keywords to spark an idea. I pulled in a shaky breath, looked at the others. There might be some staff regrouping at the sub-level offices. I heard chatter on the radio. If we get there, maybe we can figure out a plan. Donna wiped her forehead, eyes flicking from the window to me. That means crossing half the park with those things out there. But with no other choice, we waited for a lull in the chaos, listening to the diminishing screams, hoping the infected had moved on to some other corner of the park. Then we carefully lifted a section of the security gate, just enough to slip underneath. We crept in a small group, Donna, Emma, Freddie, and me. Hugging the walls, we inched toward the staff-only zone. The overhead announcement kept looping, though now it was more static than voice. Emergency, remain calm, park effect. The place felt haunted like an abandoned carnival. Halfway there, we heard a rustling behind a churro cart. My stomach clenched, but we were relieved to see it was just a terrified couple, arms around each other, crouched behind the cart. "Come on," Emma whispered, beckoning them. "We're heading to the offices." They joined us silently. I caught the woman's hushed sob. We were on the mind spin, oh God, oh God. My anxiety spiked at that. "Do you too have the brain chip?" I asked quietly. The man responded, "I do, but not her." He squeezed the woman's hand. I had it implanted last month for focus, and after the mind spin ride, I started feeling weird. My vision got blurry. I nearly blacked out. Then all those people started turning into them. I thought I was next, but he swallowed. "I feel okay now, just kind of hyper." As we continued, the man's breathing grew heavy, but he kept pace. Occasionally, he'd mutter, "I'm fine. I'm fine," as if trying to convince himself. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle, worried he could snap at any second. We rounded a bend, heading past the locked gates of the mind spin. The rides were all halted now, seats hanging lifelessly at odd angles. I remembered the hush-hush story about the pilot. High G-forces triggered something in the chip. On the outside, the commercials bragged it would enhance your resilience to daily stress. But apparently, no one accounted for roller coasters or intense carnival rides. Something about those G-forces was pushing the chip into meltdown mode, zombifying people. A flicker of memory from childhood struck me. Dad forcing me onto a small local coaster when I was 8, insisting I needed to man up. I'd ended up sobbing, and Mom and Angie had to calm me down. In that memory, Dad's face was filled with frustration at my fear, but behind it, I saw the hint of his own regrets. Why was that memory surfacing now, of all times, so vividly? At last, we reached the staff gate leading to the sub-level offices. It was locked. Emma swore under her breath. The couple behind us looked around anxiously. "Stand back," I told them. I might be able to force it, but before I could, we heard a faint click from the inside and the door opened. Standing there was Calvin, my manager. His face was drenched in sweat, but he looked relieved to see me. A number of employees crowded behind him in a dimly lit corridor. Some wore grim expressions, some looked injured. I spotted a ride technician with a makeshift bandage around his arm. "Thank God," Calvin murmured. "We've been pulling in people when we can. Things are bad outside." The door slammed shut, and we locked it tight. In the corridor's glow, I saw about a dozen souls huddled against the walls. A few more staffers, plus guests who must have found refuge here. Glancing around, I recognized a few. Jerry, a senior ride mechanic. Charlotte, a teenage concession worker from the cotton candy kiosk. And some I didn't know at all. But one figure stood out. It was an older man in a lab coat of all things. I remember thinking, why is a scientist here? He was talking quietly to Jerry. Then he turned to me and nodded in greeting. The lab coat had a patch with the same logo that I'd seen in commercials for the chip's manufacturer, Neurocore. If he was from the chip company, maybe he knew what was happening, I thought. The scientist stepped forward, offering a handshake I wasn't in the mood for, but accepted anyway. "I'm Dr. Lansing, a consultant with Neurocore. I was here to oversee the rollout of new chip features for the park staff, who volunteered for early trials, especially around high adrenaline environments." A painful look crossed his face. We didn't anticipate such a catastrophic interaction with intense G-forces. My lips curled in bitterness. "You don't say." He pressed on, voice hushed. "I suspect it's not just the G-forces, but also how the chip merges neural pathways under stress. The more adrenaline and physical pressure, the more erratic the brain activity." Some individuals might just get hyper or confident, like they're on a mania high. Others devolve into violent episodes, near mindless states, like zombies to use the colloquial term. Donna, Emma, and the rest of our group had crowded in, listening intently. The man from the couple, the one with the chip, started shaking. I feel jittery, like electricity in my veins. Am I going to, he paused, voice cracking, turn into one of those? Lansing's mouth twitched. It's not guaranteed. Everyone's brain chemistry differs. We've found about a 30% rate of immediate meltdown among those exposed to extreme G-forces, but there are also delayed cases. He looked away. This was never supposed to happen. The device was tested, or so we believed, but apparently not tested under conditions akin to repeated, heavy Gs like our biggest coasters. I thought about the pilot, that plane crash rumor, the hush money. So that's testing. People were turning into monsters because of corporate shortcuts, because they wanted to boast that the chip improved resilience. No wonder they paid out hush money. They must have known. Calvin's voice was strained. Lansing, you said you were trying to develop some frequency that could deactivate the chip, right? Dr. Lansing nodded. Yes, if we can create a targeted electromagnetic pulse or a radio frequency of a certain amplitude, it might override the chip's neural interface, essentially shutting it down. Without the chip functioning, the victims may revert to normal brain function, or at least stop the violence. My eyes flicked to the battered corridor. And you think we can do that here? He shifted from foot to foot, obviously uncomfortable. Not easily. We need equipment, a power source, and more detailed knowledge of the chip's physical state. If we had an actual sample of an implanted brain, we could calibrate. That might be our only chance. Silence fell as we absorbed the implication. A sample of an implanted brain. This couldn't end well. We relocated deeper into the sublevel, a warren of maintenance tunnels and small offices. Ceiling pipes rattled occasionally, making me jumpy. As we set up a sort of base camp in the biggest maintenance room, Dr. Lansing sketched out a plan on a piece of scrap paper. Something about an electromagnetic wave generator using the park's broadcast system. Meanwhile, people rummaged for supplies. We found a modest stash of water, some emergency rations, and flashlights. I joined a group assigned to secure the perimeter. Me, Calvin, Donna, and 2 security guards who'd made it down here. We patrolled the corridor entrances, stacking crates or furniture where possible. When we returned to the main room, Dr. Lansing was busy hooking up wires to a battered control panel. Another staffer, an older engineer named Gerard, assisted. They seemed laser-focused, flipping switches, reading data from a small digital device. The man with the chip from earlier leaned against the wall, still looking jittery. His girlfriend hovered nearby. Occasionally, he'd mutter about how he could feel his brain on fire, and her eyes filled with tears. She begged Lansing for any medication, but all he could give was a stiff apology. Half an hour later, Charlotte, the cotton candy vendor, ran in, breathless. They're at the top of the stairwell, a group of them. They haven't come down yet, but they're moaning or something. It's horrifying. All around me, people's eyes flicked toward Dr. Lansing, as if hoping he'd conjure a miracle. But then the conversation took a much darker turn. The scientist's face was pale. I need to see a chip in meltdown, in a real brain. Without that, I'm just guessing at the correct frequency. If I get it wrong, we might fry normal neural activity for everyone, or not affect it at all. Are you saying that you need a victim? Donna asked, voice shaking. Like literally open someone's skull. Lansing's gaze fell to the floor. I'm afraid so. I know how it sounds. It's barbaric. But we're dealing with a crisis. We can't replicate these conditions in a lab environment right now. We need a direct sample. A silence like a lead blanket fell over the group. My stomach churned. Nobody spoke, but the reality was clear. If we wanted a chance at saving ourselves, saving anyone, we might have to sacrifice a living person who carried the chip. The man with the chip gave a strangled laugh. That's insane. You can't just crack someone's head open like we're on a butcher's block. Calvin's jaw tightened. I'm not condoning anything, but if the entire park is going down, if there are hundreds out there turning into monsters, we might have to consider it. No one had a solution. The father and daughter that I had seen earlier had found their way here, the little girl trembling silently. My heart clenched at the sight. It reminded me of my sister Angie when she was small. Eventually, the man with the chip shuddered. I'm not volunteering. I still feel in control. A hush fell. The father, who was unchipped, growled under his breath. He's the best candidate. Could lose it at any moment, could attack us. He's a ticking time bomb. His girlfriend cried out, "That's not fair." The debate raged on, voices raising in desperation. Then a compromise formed. A small group would venture upstairs, attempt to lure or tranquilize a meltdown victim, and bring them to Lansing. We found a couple of tasers in the security office, a handful of pepper spray canisters, and some rope. "All right, I will go," I said quietly. "I can't just stand here and let us slip into barbarism. Let's do this the right way." Donna grabbed my arm. "I'll go with you." A security guard named Alan also volunteered. The chipped man stayed behind, shaking in relief but also guilt. Dr. Lansing gave us a small container of sedatives in case we managed to actually restrain one of them. "Inject them in the thigh," he instructed, "if you can do it without losing your hand." No one laughed at that. We turned a corner near the bumper cars. That's where we saw them, 4 or 5 silhouettes staggering in the gloom. They wore tattered, blood-stained clothes. One had a chunk of flesh missing from her shoulder, yet she trudged on as if numb to pain. Their eyes were a milky white, jaws slack. This is real, I thought with a sick jolt. Truly real. Alan whispered, "One is all we need. We lure one, subdue them, and bring it back." One of the infected turned our way, maybe catching our scent. It let out a guttural snarl, spurring the others to follow suit. Then they advanced, a slow but determined gait. First, Donna tried pepper spray, stepping forward and unleashing a direct stream at the closest infected, a man whose left forearm was bent unnaturally. He stumbled back, letting out a throaty hiss, wiping at his face. But the pepper spray didn't deter him for long. That's when Alan fired the taser. The man collapsed in spasms, at least temporarily incapacitated. "Oh God," Donna breathed, "we got one." The problem was the others were closing in, 2 women and another man. We couldn't handle them all with just one more taser shot. I stepped forward, spraying wildly at them, hoping to buy a second. They recoiled, but my pepper spray canister sputtered out almost instantly. Alan barked, "Grab the one that we dropped, quick." Donna and I lunged for the fallen infected, who was still twitching. We each took one of his arms and with terrified haste started dragging him backward. The others, enraged, rushed us with stumbling speed. "Run," I yelled. The others followed in a ragged pursuit, moaning louder, footsteps shuffling. My heart hammered as we made for the stairwell door. We were maybe 10 steps away when the immobilized infected man started shaking off the taser's effect. He growled and began to flail. "Hold him," as we struggled to keep a grip. He snapped his teeth dangerously close to my hand, and I yanked away just in time. Then, behind us, Alan stopped. I barely registered it at first, too focused on the thrashing thing in our hands. But then I heard his breath hitch, just a second of hesitation. "You go," he said. His voice was steady, resolved. "What?" "No," I turned, but he was already stepping back toward the infected. "Get that thing inside. You need it more than me." Before I could argue, he whirled, charging at the closest infected with a guttural yell, tackling it to the ground. "Alan," Donna screamed. The last thing I saw before we shoved through the stairwell door was Alan, pinning one of them down, fists swinging. The others swarmed him as the door slammed shut behind us. We wasted no time, dragging the half-conscious creature down the stairs. Each step felt like hauling a bag of rabid wolves. He squirmed, bit at the air, nearly sank his teeth into my arm. When the others saw us, they went wide-eyed, hastily clearing a path. Dr. Lansing's face paled, horrified as he registered Alan's absence, but he steeled himself. "Put him on that table in the maintenance room," he barked. "Hurry." We wrestled the meltdown victim onto a large metal table that Jerry and Charlotte had cleared in the corner. He snapped, his eyes wild, limbs thrashing so violently that it took 6 of us to hold him in place. Dr. Lansing quickly injected the sedative into his thigh. Then, slowly, his movements dulled, eyes drooping until he collapsed into a dazed but still twitching state. Panting, we strapped him down with rope. My head was reeling from adrenaline, sweat, and the stench of his blood-caked clothes. Dr. Lansing looked at the patient with a pained expression. "He's gone. If we can't cure him, at least we can learn how to help the others." Lansing donned latex gloves from a medical kit he'd apparently found. "Gerard," he said softly, "get the saw." A collective gasp. Gerard turned pale, but he obeyed. My stomach churned as Lansing prepared surgical tools. This was some dark age horror, but if it gave us a shot at saving lives. Using a scalpel and a small saw, Lansing then opened the infected man's skull. I caught glimpses of bone fragments and the glint of bright red tissue. The man twitched even under sedation, letting out weak growls. Finally, Lansing let out a trembling breath. I can see the device, lodged along the temporal region. The neural filaments are integrated deeply. It's like it's fused with the brain's memory centers. A vile smell of blood and something chemical filled the air. "This is more extensive than the earlier chip prototypes," Lansing muttered, voice shaking. "There are additional conduction pathways that might be bridging various lobes." He managed to remove the small metallic chip. A $50-sized piece of blackish titanium and silicone, trailing wispy wires that tore away from the brain matter with a sickening snap. The body jerked once, then went still, his chest seizing in final convulsions. Lansing laid the bloody chip onto a tray. "He's gone," the scientist murmured. We all stared at the dead man on the table, the top of his skull a gory ruin. We had actively sacrificed a living human. And now that we had lost Alan regardless, it felt like it was all for nothing. While Dr. Lansing and Gerard studied the chip, the rest of us retreated into tense corners of the maintenance room or the adjoining corridors. Some wept quietly. Others stared blankly at the floor. I found myself pacing as horrific images danced behind my eyes. I could hardly stand the claustrophobic air in the makeshift lab, so I slipped out into a side passage. As I walked, memories pressed in on me. I couldn't explain it. Why am I remembering my childhood so vividly? The fights between my parents, the day Dad walked out for good, how Angie cried and tried to hold on to him. The times before that at amusement parks, those fleeting happy moments overshadowed by the tension. Something Lansing said about the chip bridging memory centers rang in my ears. What if someone had put that chip into my brain without me knowing it? Then, a new memory rose unbidden. My father arguing on the phone about that damn park. What park was he talking about? I remember him mentioning something about investment shares, shady backers, family secrets. I'd been too young to understand, but a suspicious seed was planted. Did my father have some tie to the park? Something that made him hate or fear it? I nearly jumped out of my skin when Donna touched my shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Before I could respond, we heard footsteps behind us. Dr. Lansing and Gerard emerged, both looking haunted but resolute. Lansing held the extracted chip in a clear plastic bag, stained with flecks of blood. "We've analyzed enough to guess what frequency might disrupt it," Lansing said. But we have to feed that frequency into a powerful broadcaster. The park's main broadcast tower is above ground. I'll need a small team to carry the frequency generator up there and wire it in. I can't do it alone. We have to rig a device that transmits the exact amplitude we need. If successful, it might turn off all chips in range. Best case scenario, the transformed victims come out of that frenzy. Worst case, we do nothing but cause mild interference and they remain violent. But we have to try. All right, Calvin said. Count me in. Colin and Donna, we need you too. Jerry, you come for the engineering part. The rest guard the sublevel in case we fail. Before heading out, we heard a commotion. The chipped man from earlier, who was so jittery, began convulsing, eyes rolled back. Several rushed to restrain him, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed he was on the brink of meltdown. But then his eyes cleared, and he gasped for air, traumatized. We left them behind, not sure if he'd be stable for long. Each step upward set my nerves on edge. The moans from behind the door had quieted. Either the infected moved on or were waiting in ambush. At the top, we paused, exchanging tense looks. Calvin eased the door open a crack. We slid out, scanning our surroundings. We needed to get to the broadcast tower near the roller coaster control station, roughly at the center of the park. The path we took went through the concourse past the Ferris wheel. The entire park, once so vibrant, felt like a graveyard. My grip on the makeshift metal club tightened. As we edged around a corner, I spotted a horrifying sight. At the base of the Ferris wheel, 2 brain chip victims hunched over a motionless figure, feasting. We skirted them by keeping low and quiet behind booths. The moaning between them was like animals growling over a meal. Finally, the looming silhouette of the Mindspin rose ahead, a twisted metal structure that soared over the park. Next to it was the small building containing the broadcast tower controls. We dashed up to the locked door, hearts pounding. Jerry fiddled with the maintenance key, but it wouldn't fit. Must be a new lock, he muttered. Stand back, Calvin said as he grabbed a crowbar from the tool bag and wedged it into the doorframe. With a few forceful attempts, the latch splintered and the door swung open. Inside, it was pitch black except for the faint glow of emergency lights. Dr. Lansing carefully set the frequency generator on a console. Then came the delicate process of hooking wires into the soundboard. As Lansing worked, Jerry gave a quick tutorial. We'll set the master volume to the max across the entire park. The second we flip this switch, every speaker from the carousel to the haunted house will blast your frequency. Just hope we got it right. It's ready, he breathed. Jerry, power it up. Jerry flipped a switch on the main console. A faint hum filled the air, and we heard a static crackle from overhead speakers outside. Volume is on max, Jerry said. Whenever you're ready. Lansing hovered his finger over a red button on the frequency generator. Here goes everything, he muttered, pressing the button. Suddenly, a blast of high-pitched resonance rang out across the park. At first, nothing seemed different. The infected still wandered, moaned. One near the Ferris wheel jerked its head as if hearing something. Then, slowly, some began staggering in confusion, grabbing their temples as the moans morphed into pained groans. A few collapsed to the ground, twitching. Hope flared in my chest. It's working. But just then, we heard a screech, unbelievably loud, from the zombies near the Mindspin line. Several of them started convulsing violently, and then they sprinted, not away, but toward the broadcast building. Crap, Donna muttered. They're coming. Calvin barked. We hold them off until it fully takes effect. Lansing, any idea how long this needs to run? He shook his head. A few minutes, maybe. They have to basically reset their neural pathways. If they're too far gone, it might not work at all. Outside the windows, we watched a group of 5 or 6 break into a dead run, heading straight for our building. Others flailed on the ground, but these ones seemed unaffected or even more enraged. "Barricade the doors," Calvin ordered. We dragged a heavy table in front of the entrance. They were close now, howling, slamming their fists on the walls. One shattered a window with a single blow, forcing Jerry and I to block it with debris, but an arm shoved through the broken glass, clawing at us. Jerry yelped, nearly losing his balance. Then with a loud crash, the door burst inward, sending the table skidding. Two creatures lurched in, faces contorted, eyes furious. Calvin swung a metal pipe, connecting with the first shoulder. The infected man staggered but barely paused, launching forward again. I joined in, striking at the second with my club. It howled, spitting blood. One of them seized Calvin's arm, yanking him so hard he nearly lost his footing. Donna screamed, trying to pull him free. Another came at me, nails raking my forearm. A flash of searing pain, but I managed to fend it off, slamming my club into its torso. The entire room was chaos, shouts, snarls, the hiss of pepper spray. Glass crunched underfoot. We're not going to make it, I thought, as the second infected man pinned me against a wall. His teeth gnashed inches from my throat. My arms burned from pushing him away. The rancid smell of decay wafted over me. Calvin tackled him off me, smashing the pipe into his head repeatedly. Then out of nowhere, a new voice rang out. "Get down." We all instinctively ducked. A figure stepped in from behind the creatures, wearing a torn staff uniform, the manager. It was Hank, one of the senior supervisors. With a small tranquilizer gun in his hand, he fired darts at the zombified pair. They spasmed, collapsing to the floor. Another zombie turned on him, but he whirled, injecting himself with something from a small vial. In seconds, Hank then let out a roar, eyes glowing with some unnatural intensity. He literally grabbed the creature by the throat and shoved it aside like it weighed nothing. "What the?" Donna gasped, stumbling backward. Hank took a trembling breath. I tried to hold them off, but they cornered me. "We've got no time." Then he shot a glance at Dr. Lansing's generator. "You got the frequency going, good." He picked up something from his pocket. Another vial glimmered in his palm. I recognized the same label as the chip company's brand. "Did you have an antidote all this time?" Dr. Lansing stammered. "How?" Hank clenched his jaw. "Neurocore placed me here to monitor the chip's performance in real-world scenarios. I had a personal failsafe." My stomach twisted. "Are you an insider? Did you know this was a possibility?" He grimaced. "Not exactly. I just knew there was a risk. The company wanted real data on meltdown events under stress. They insisted it was very unlikely that people wouldn't get violently infected like this. I was to keep watch, record anomalies, and intervene if needed. I didn't expect it to escalate this quickly." Calvin stared at him, rage seeping into his tone. "So you let us all walk into this experiment?" Hank avoided our eyes. "I was under strict orders, and I only had enough antidote for myself. I told them it might not be enough if something major went wrong, but they insisted." He trailed off, though the disgust in his voice suggested he was as much a pawn as a perpetrator. I felt revulsion, betrayal. Outside, the creatures howled. The frequency continued blaring. Some infected in the distance collapsed, twitching. Maybe it was working, but I saw plenty still rampaging. We rebarricaded the entrance, adrenaline coursing in our veins. Hank, in his roided-up or drug-induced state, was strong enough to help fend off a final rush. Lansing kept the frequency generator stable. Over the next few minutes, the creature who had broken in were either subdued or retreated, disoriented. Some crawled away, wailing. Through the shattered windows, we watched multiple infected collapse into seizures. The hum of the broadcast filled our ears like an otherworldly lullaby. Finally, the chaos seemed to subside. The building stank of blood, broken furniture, sweat, and fear. Dr. Lansing slowly turned the frequency dial down a notch. Outside, Moans drifted into silence. Some infected lay motionless, while others shuddered as though waking from a nightmare. I felt a fleeting surge of relief. Did we do it? The park was a graveyard, but maybe the meltdown was halted. Hank cleared his throat, stepping over a lifeless creature. We should check on the sublevel. Make sure it worked on everyone down there who had a chip. Calvin glared at him. Why don't you lead the way, since you apparently have all the secrets? Hank avoided the accusation in Calvin's eyes. Fine. His voice was subdued, guilt-ridden. We arrived back at the sublevel door, newly forced open. Inside, the corridor was dark. A rancid smell hung in the air. My pulse quickened. Something felt wrong. We inched forward, calling out softly. Emma, Charlotte, is anyone there? No reply, only echoing footfalls and our ragged breathing. In the main maintenance room, we discovered a horrifying sight. The father's child, and a few others huddled in a corner, eyes wide with terror. Some had blood on them, but they didn't appear bitten. Across the room, 2 bodies lay still. One was the chipped man from earlier. The other was his girlfriend. Both unmoving, eyes open, vacant. Did the frequency arrive too late for them? Emma emerged from behind an overturned cabinet. They attacked us, she murmured in a trembling voice. He turned, bit her. Some others escaped up the corridor. As for Charlotte, I don't know if she made it. She gazed at us, shell-shocked. What happened up there? Dr. Lansing gently explained about the broadcast. Emma nodded, tears wetting her cheeks. Then she eyed Hank warily. And who is this? Hank averted his gaze. Calvin spat. He's from Neurocore. That was enough. Emma's face hardened with anger, but she was too exhausted to rage. The father and child approached me. The child was trembling, clutching a ragged stuffed lion. Are we safe now? She asked, voice small. I knelt to her level, glancing at the corpses around us. I don't know, I said honestly, but we're alive, that's something. It was quiet for a few minutes, only the dripping of a broken water pipe in the distance. Then Dr. Lansing, still holding the bloody chip in a bag, looked around. We need to get medical help. Even if the meltdown is reversing, these people need real doctors, not an improvised lab. And the park is locked down by the authorities. Or was. Maybe we can override that from the main gate's control station. Hank, his artificially enhanced strength apparently waning, nodded. I have clearance codes. The company gave them to me in an emergency. That might open the gates. Calvin glared. So now you tell us. Hank's voice caught. I wasn't sure until now if opening the gates would worsen the outbreak outside. He slowly retrieved a smartphone from his pocket. Let's go. We can try to contact external authorities and see if the meltdown wave is ending. If it is, they'll let us out. Otherwise, these codes might at least unlock the gates, and we can escape. Part of me wanted to punch him for hiding so much information, for letting us suffer. But we were too drained for more confrontation. So a battered, bruised group, we formed a plan. A final trek to the main entrance. If we could get out, maybe the world outside had solutions. Or maybe it was overrun with zombies. But we couldn't stay locked here forever. As we ascended to the surface once more, my mind whirled with uncertainty. My family's fractured memories weighed on me. If Dad had known about this place, had he known about the shady deals behind these rides, these experiments? Was that part of why he left us? We passed the battered remains of the Tilt-A-Whirl. I'd spent so many hours there, smiling at kids, feeling proud of my job. Now it was a shell, the lights dark, the seats stained with spatters of blood. In a sense, it felt like my last illusions of childhood fun had died along with those brain chip victims. We approached the front gates in uneasy silence. Hank fiddled with a small device on his phone. The gates shuddered, beeped, and then parted. Beyond them lay a parking lot strewn with abandoned cars, some with shattered windows, others with doors flung open. No official rescue. No lines of police or hazmat suits. Just emptiness. My stomach twisted. Where did everyone go? Hank stepped through first, scanning the horizon. We can find a working vehicle, maybe. His voice trailed off as we noticed shapes on the far side of the parking lot. Human shapes. Hundreds of them. Shambling, moaning, some moved aimlessly, others turned our way. "Oh God," Donna whispered. "It's not just the park. This wasn't just about the mind-spin ride or a hidden corporate experiment. It might be citywide, maybe even further. We're out of the park, but into what?" My mind reeled with questions. We created a frequency that might save some people, but do we have enough reach to save an entire city? Will we have to do even more monstrous things to survive? I didn't have the answers. All I had was my next breath, the battered people beside me, and the disturbing knowledge that if we looked for refuge, we might just find another nest of zombified humans. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint siren. We stood at the threshold of the amusement park, the sky darkening overhead. No rescue, no instructions, just us. I took a tentative step forward, gripping my makeshift club, heart thundering with both fear and a strange determination. We survived the park, but out here, the true nightmare might just be beginning. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.